Hey everybody, how's it Drum Talk TV with this is June 1st. I cannot believe it's June 1st and we just finished May. And May was a month of, well, let's just say it how it is. First time offenders, first time hazing victims, and now we're starting out June with the same thing. First time offender, guest Lenny White, who's been on my bucket list for 8.5 years, almost to the date. I started Drum Talk TV January 7th of 2013. Lenny, welcome. How are you, sir?
Pleasure to be here, Dan. Pleasure to
Thank you
be
very much. Thanks. I got to start out with this because this has been simmering and bubbling and just like a teapot with nowhere to release the steam for years and years and years. This album for me as a musician, I was I think 14 when this came out or something like that.
Wow.
And this album changed my whole view of music. Before this album, there were three other albums that opened my brain. It was the first Led Zeppelin album, then it was the live, The Song Remains the Same, then it was Yes Songs, and when this album came out, and I know there's rules in music, sort of. There's music theory, but when I heard this album, Lenny, as a young musician, I thought, oh, so there's kind of like no rules in music. And what that really translated to was that the horizons were much farther away from each other than I really understood at that point. And then later, a little later in life, I think it was for my 22nd birthday, two friends of mine that were involved in music with me behind the scenes. One was a lighting director, one set up my equipment for what ended up being 23 years, and somehow we're still friends. They took me to see you guys at what used to be the Universal Amphitheater in Los Angeles to see that show. And quite frankly, it was kind of mind-blowing. My question for you is, when you, Chick, Stanley, and Al got together and started making music together, and particularly this album, was it business as usual, or did you know that you were doing something that was going to be coloring outside of a lot of lines people would be familiar with? Or like, what was that like?
To be honest, when I first played with Chick and Stanley, um, we started to do something different because I had played with Stanley before in Joe Henderson's band,
Mm,
and I had played with Chick before on Miles Davis's Bitches Brew. So
right.
this is the first time the three of us had gotten together and played music together. What happened was I was in San Francisco playing with a band called Azteca, and Chick and Stanley were in Tokyo doing. They were doing a whole tour of Japan, and that was the band that had Airto and Flora and Joe Farrell.
Mm,
They decided to break that band up, and they were coming to San Francisco, and Chick called me and said, "Hey, would you like to be in a trio with Stanley and I?" And I said, "Sure." I mean, because I had some time off. I was in San Francisco at the time, and we came together and played at the Keystone Corner in San Francisco, and it was absolutely amazing. It was great. We played a week, and at the end of the week, Chick had two guitar players sit in because it was just a trio. And the guitar players were Barry Finnerty, who was in the Bay Area, and Billy Connors. And at the end of that night, Chick said that he wanted to make an electric Return to Forever because the Return to Forever before that, I said, had Airto and Flora and Joe Farrell in it.
right.
And so there was no electric guitar. And like by then, Chick had heard Mahavishnu and wanted to do something that was more electric. And so he asked me to be a part of that band, but I was out there with Azteca, and I said, "Well, Chick, no, I think I'm going to stay out here and play with this band." And so they went back to New York, and they got Steve Gadd to play in Return to Forever. And while I was still out in San Francisco, I got a call from um, a manager by the name of Herbie Hubbard. And I knew Greg Rowley from Santana because Michael Spieth and I
Right.
were very good friends. And I knew uh, Greg, and I knew Neil Sean because Neil Sean had played on the Azteca record. And so I got a call from Herbie Herbert, and he said to me, "Listen, Ross Valerie and guitar player, I just said
Neil Schon.
Neil Sean would like to jam with you." And I said, "Yeah, sure." I had some time off, so we did. We went to SIR and we played, and they loved it. They said, "Man, this is really great." And everything. So by this time period that I had this time off, um, Steve Gadd had decided that he wanted to do stuff in the studio and not go on tour or anything. So Chick called me again and said, like, listen, man, why don't you come back and play with Stanley and I and do Return to Forever? And I said, okay, I think that would be cool. In this same time period, I got this call from Herbie Herbert. And Herbie calls me and he says, listen, these guys are going to start a new band and they want you to be a part of their band. And I said, well, Herbie, I can't do that because I'm going to go back and play with Chick and Stanley with Return to Forever. And they said, oh, okay, okay. We understand. But that band was Journey.
Oh, wow. I think I've heard of them. Wow. And Journey was quite progressive back then, right?
Yes,
With the
yes.
stuff they did with Ainsley.
Well, Ainsley was the first guy to play. After I said no, Ainsley played with them.
Right.
And that's where that came from. Now,
Wow.
I had been listening to, of course, Led Zeppelin, and I had been listening to Yes and King Crimson. So by the time we did this record, Romantic Warrior, I had bought those kind of instances in playing to this band. And this was the very first concept album that we had put together. And as you see, it had this vibe about it being a concept.
Yeah.
And we started to get into this and create this vibe that record really has. Um, that was the idea. And I was speaking to, I forgot who I was speaking with the other day, but he said that he had listened to an interview that Bill Bruford had done that said that there were two bands that got his perspective when he got into the Yes Band, and they were Return to Forever and Mahavishnu Orchestra.
Oh, wow.
So there was this little cross collateralization going on
Yeah.
with all these different musical styles and this perspective at this particular time to
Yeah.
create that. But without a doubt, I had thought about Led Zeppelin. That's where this big ass drum sound came from.
Right.
And I had been thinking about Yes, and I had been thinking about King Crimson.
Very interesting. Um, the thing is that for me, other than like old school traditional jazz that had people like Count Basie, Duke Ellington, um, other jazz musicians with drummers like not just Buddy Rich, of course, but Sonny Payne and Rufus Speedy Jones and all those drummers from back then. I had never, other than that type of music, heard an all instrumental album. So when Romantic Warrior came out, that was like the other element. It wasn't just the music or just the vibe. It was that it was a concept album and it was all instrumental that absolutely told a story. What was the process like putting that music together? Was it very, very collaborative, or did someone have a foundation for it that everyone built on? What was that process like, Lenny?
Well, here's the issue. The issue is that I had said that I had played with Stanley before this,
Right.
Joe Henderson's band, and I
Hmm.
had played with Chick before this in Bitches Brew. See, there's B music and ABB music before Bitches Brew,
Hmm.
after Bitches Brew. Bitches
Oh.
was the change. And when I got asked to play on that record, that was a paradigm shift
Mm.
because before that, the music hadn't sounded like that. When we did Bitches Brew, we didn't know what that was going to be. We didn't know. I mean, we were there playing with Miles's concept. That was Miles's concept. It was his version of what rock and roll should be.
Oh, wow. Interesting.
You know, you had 13 guys in the studio at the same time playing Miles's concept of what it is he thought the new music should be.
Hmm.
And so the issue was that was something brand new that I had never even thought about playing before. By the time that record had been done, then the concept of making music like that had been put out there for us. So when we got to doing Romantic Warrior, the idea was yes, okay, we were going to have an album where every piece on the album was going to be part of a story.
Hmm.
And that story was what that album depicted, Romantic Warrior. So if you think about it, the first tune is called um, what was the name of the first tune?
Oh, I can hear it.
Yeah, no, no, no.
And I tried to dig my album out. I have the original release in a cabinet back here, and I've got some BS in the way.
No,
I fell. I almost went through the closet door. I can't even
medieval
get it.
overture.
Yeah,
That was
yeah.
it was an overture, and it was medieval. The whole
Right.
vibe.
Medieval Overture. Yep.
Then there was sorceress,
Yep.
and then there was the romantic warrior.
Yeah. And Jester and the call and response
Doing
between
doing
Jester
the
and
jester and the tyrant.
yeah, I
The
love that. Yeah.
uh, um, uh, the magician,
Yeah.
majestic dance. They were all concepts of a story being told, and that was the whole thing. That's what kind of gave us the impetus to try to make some music that was visual.
Yeah.
It
Yeah.
wasn't just writing music that
No,
you
it played to the theater of the mind for sure.
exactly you created um, visual. It was an audio movie.
Right.
Was the concept of doing that, and so there was collaboration because everybody thought about it from the perspective of how each song had it was episodic. Each song was an episode of the story that's being told.
Yeah. Just such an influential album. And considering when it came out, oh, 75 or 76, if I remember right.
It's 75, 76. Yeah.
Yeah. And here we are, 2024, and it could have come out today and it still would sound ahead of its time, even with all the amazing music that's come out since. And I think that's a testament to the collaboration between the four of you. And I remember before seeing you live, many years before seeing you live, um, I remember the PBS broadcast of you guys playing that album, and that was like wow, seeing no overdubs or anything, and there's the same music, which was so impressive. But the interesting thing when I did see you live that blew me away about Al was there's all this music happening, all these time signature changes, key changes, all these polyrhythms, all this brainiac stuff going on. But the only time he looked at music was when he did his solos, and he had a music stand over by Chick's keyboards, and he'd walk over and you'd hear the same exact solos on the album, but he's reading the music. And I thought to myself, of all times to look at music, it was just so bizarre. Can you speak to that?
Well, see, here's my perspective. My perspective is that I know that notation is put there so that the artist can understand the synergy and go by what it is that the composer wants to have happen.
Mm-hmm.
I'd rather create music than play it. That's why I never had music up there for me to play. I made it a point for myself to learn conceptually what the composer has in mind and try to do my version of what that is and make music from what the composer wants me to do. It's just
And
like
it may or may not be the exact same thing every night on a tour, right?
that's exactly right. That's the whole point. And all due respect to Al, I don't think Al intended to do that either. But the fact is that that was Al joined the band when he was 19 years old.
I know that's crazy.
And so, Al grew to be the artist that he is today. I mean, and that was a growing process to have that happen.
Right.
He's an amazing artist. So rather than make a mistake or I think that he felt that he needed to do that. After a while, he didn't need to do that anymore.
Yeah.
So if you advanced and watched us later on, he had no music up there.
Mm. And
Yeah.
I think the thing that was perplexing to me was not that I felt he needed a safety net or didn't know his own music, because I know that a lot of artists, when they tour, and especially when I saw you guys, it was many years after the album came out. And if you don't play the music for a long time, it's almost like you're relearning it, remembering it for the first time, because maybe you haven't played in 5, 10, 15 years in whatever cases. But it's that he he read the music and it sounded exactly note for note like the album. And I in one way it was perplexing, and another way it was so impressive that he did that and knew to do that to get to where he wanted it to be live, which I thought was great. I thought it was fascinating, actually.
Did you not? There is a piece of there is a concert that we did in '83 after the band had broken up, when we got back and played in New York City at the Palladium, which no longer exists. He didn't read none of that music, baby. And
Yeah.
it is absolutely amazing. It's amazing that we played that music that Chick had written, who no one has ever heard since then.
Yeah.
And everybody played that music without looking at any charts or anything like that. And it was absolutely amazing.
Is that
So,
filmed anywhere? Is that on a DVD or anything, Lenny?
no,
No. Anything from those tours back then, from 83, 85? I think I saw you in 85 because I would have been 22.
yes, there is music um, that is pretty remarkable. Um, I'm trying to possibly get some of that put out.
Great. That's outstanding. And folks, chime in if you have questions for Lenny. I'll relay those. And I'm going to show a couple clips in a moment and ask Lenny a couple drumming questions. But before that, I want to go even further back in time, someone that you mentioned, and talk about your work with Miles Davis, another landmark album with Bitches Brew. Billy Cobham, who also played with Miles when he was young, told me that Miles was like the easiest person to work with. What's your take on I can't even say that with a straight face. What was it like working with Mr. Davis, Lenny?
But you see, Miles Davis and Wayne Shorter come from a space where they create music. It's not that they're players. They played music with, great musicians, Charlie Parker, Art Blakey, Freddie Hubbard, whoever, whatever.
Yeah.
But they're creators, and they used all the different kinds of musics that they experienced to create music, to take all of those different musical situations and create something new.
Hmm.
They didn't write music out for you to play it. Miles said to me with Bitches Brew, his information for me to get to the point where I was supposed to play the music that he had in his head. He said, think of this as a big pot of stew, and I want you to be salt.
Oh,
So now, what musical or drumming knowledge am I going to call upon to sound like salt?
right. He intentionally leave that up to interpretation for you?
He wanted me to create. He wanted me to create my existence in this thing that he was asking everybody else to create. I was supposed to be a part of that. And whatever it is that I brought, not bought, brought to that would be my perspective of what that music should do. Nobody knew.
Right.
He didn't give us chart. I mean, Joe Zawinul had written some charts, but Miles said, "Okay, yeah, well, let's not do that. Let's take that out."
Oh,
And,
wow.
and that's how that record got created.
Wow. Fascinating.
Like rock and roll is licks,
Yeah.
lick music. There's a lick that he had John McLaughlin play.
Hmm.
He called it John McLaughlin. Do 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 do. It was a lick, and then we just played and made some music out of that. You know, so
Yeah.
I mean, like rock and roll, it was riff music. It was a
Right.
riff, you know.
Yeah.
And so when that music was created and came out, everybody said, "Oh wow, this is." I mean, before they called it that horrible F word fusion, it was jazz rock.
Hmm. Yeah.
Basically,
Absolutely.
that's what it was. It was two different kinds of musics. It was rock and roll and jazz. And
Yeah.
basically, Miles was saying that this is what rock and roll, this is my version of rock and roll. So all the guys, with the exception of the bass player, Harvey Brooks, who was a rock and roll musician,
Yeah.
were jazz musicians. Everybody else was a jazz musician. So it was Miles's version of getting jazz musicians to play his version of rock and roll.
It's interesting because that really reveals what ended up being, if we look at from left to right, the arc of Miles' music, not just his music, but his stage persona and the way he presented music. And it's encapsulated really beautifully in that film about him that you're in. And towards those latter years, when he got more flashy, and I forget to use the word flamboyant with the way the stage was set up and his outfits and everything like that, that was the rock star in him, right? I mean, that was his presentation of really just,
But
there's,
he always wore slick clothes. He was always cool, man. He was the
yeah,
epitome of cool. You know,
right.
we didn't want to just play like Miles Davis. We wanted to be Miles Davis.
Yeah, yeah,
Totally different. You got to understand. Miles Davis is the only musician to play with Charlie Parker and Prince.
wow, yeah. What a spectrum there. Yeah,
Right. So he's played his version of music, encapsulating all these different kinds of musics that he listened to and that he liked
yeah,
to become Miles Davis. And we, Chick, Wayne, Jack DeJohnette, all of us, Marcus, we took that perspective and made the music that we made.
Yeah. It's just such a flag in the timeline
Yes.
of music and what matters in music and what someone can recognize, in time, certain things happen that are like earmarked or flagged. And
Yeah.
that's one of those periods that were just influenced so many musicians and not all the same way, which I think is so important. It influenced so many musicians in different ways that then that branched off and there's a lot of credit due for that, I think.
I agree. I agree. 1,000%.
Yeah. Who were some of your earliest influences, Lenny? And when did you start and why drums?
I'm not sure why drums, because I wanted to play trumpet, and
Oh,
and I wound up playing drums. And my early references, musical references, um, morphed into what I call the Magnificent Seven, because I heard jazz music around my house all the time, and I listened to R&B radio and pop radio at the time. Coming up as a kid, I had a transistor radio, and I went to sleep by listening to music. But I listened to Broadway shows, and I listened to classical music too. But my big influences in terms of drums were the Magnificent Seven. And the Magnificent Seven are the architects of modern jazz drumming. I'm not saying that I did not listen to Papa Joe and Sid Catlett. I listened to all that music too coming up. But
hmm
the Magnificent Seven for me were Kenny Clark, Art Blakey, Max Roach,
hmm
Philly Joe Jones, Elvin Jones, Roy Haynes, and Tony Williams. They are the architects of modern jazz drumming.
yeah,
And Jarbo Starks and Clyde Stubblefield, who played with Miles Davis,
yeah,
and John Bonham.
yeah.
And a funny thing, it's really this, I can't make this up, but one day I was at Wallace Roney's house, and Wallace Roney said to me, he said, "Hey man, did you like John Bonham?" I said, "Yeah, I love John Bonham." He said, I said, "Why?" He said, "Because he said some really good things about you." I said, "Really? Oh wow." So sometime after that, I was in LA, and I went to Pro Percussion, the Jet Drum Shop,
Yeah. In LA, yep.
Yes. And there was a magazine on the counter, and it was an interview of John Bonham and talking about his studio sessions. I mean, like, they talk about different tunes that Black Dog had become my favorite Led
Oh,
Zeppelin.
yeah.
And later on, as I got really into Led Zeppelin, "In My Time of Dying" was my
Oh,
favorite.
yeah.
Come on, man.
All those signature changes and yeah.
Absolutely killing. So I go and I'm looking at the magazine, and he's talking about, when we went in and did this, this is what I was thinking about. And I went to "In My Time of Dying," and I read what he said. And he said, by this time, we had been listening to more progressive music, and I had been listening to Tony Williams, Lenny White, and Alphonse Mouzon.
Wow. How'd that feel?
Felt fantastic.
Wow. He was my first influence, and, yesterday was his birthday. He would have been 76, and we always have John Bonham Day, and we invite fans to send in videos that we vet and we post some old bootleg videos. And this year, for the first time, I don't think we did it last year because I don't think it was ready, but last year, May 20th, we had the Drum Talk TV 10-year anniversary show in Las Vegas. And Jeff Berlin was my co-host for the show, and he kind of basically helped me unpack the Drum Talk TV story. And then my old band from the late 70s performed, and we played almost all Led Zeppelin music back in our day. And for this show, because it circled back to, well, where did I start and all that stuff. So then the guys came out, and we played an hour and a half of Led Zeppelin music. So yesterday we played, I think we posted 3 of those songs, which would have been the Wanton Song, The Song Remains the Same, and Moby Dick. And we recently finished mixing Rock and Roll and Celebration Day, which was played in the version of The Song Remains the Same. And that's how we started the concert. And then the film, the documentary ends, and it has Jeff Berlin and our MC, A.D. Adams, who plays with Louis Prima Jr. and the Witnesses, jamming while the credits are going. And now we're finishing mixing the rest of the songs and going to put that out as a separate thing. So I come from, that's what I like to say, I learned the language of his music, because I think a lot of times, Lenny, what happens is, and this isn't to slight anybody, but you can go to a pub or a wedding or a bar mitzvah, whatever, and you can see a band playing an assortment of songs, and they might play an Aerosmith song, an AC/DC song, a Led Zeppelin song, Bad Company song, and so on, if they're playing classic rock. And they all sound like the band you're seeing. Whereas someone who really learns the language of each player that they're emulating, they match that guitar sound. Like you mentioned Black Dog, you match that guitar sound. You match, it's not just a matter of math where the beats are put, but how the drum sounds, how the guitar sounds, what is the technique of how the snare is being hit? Are the roughs and the drags there? Is the hi-hat too tight for how that song actually sounds? And that's the first musician I really analyzed and listened to those nuances, which taught me so much more about my instrument. So many more sounds you can get out of a cymbal, out of the hi-hats, out of just one single drum, by really analyzing the difference between Down by the Seaside and In My Time of Dying, or Black Dog and Thank You, if you will, but yet it still sounds like the same drummer, of course.
Well, you know what's interesting, and what I found to be interesting is the fact that drummers play certain ways where they play beats and the melodies kind of fit with those beats.
Mm-hmm.
The thing that Bonham did for me, which was different, I mean, like similar to Tony Williams, is they play somewhat melodically, and the music fits around what it is that they do. Because
Yeah.
if you take something very simple like what John Bonham's beat is on Black Dog,
Yeah.
you say tap 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 boom smack. The snare drum beats that, which is da 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 do be da dee dee da. That's really simple, but I don't think drummers normally hear like that. And
I
that's
agree. Yeah.
and that's what kind of got me into him from the rock and roll perspective. I said, well, wait, but he don't really play just like a rock and roll drummer. He plays some other things, and I think that music was fixed and made around his beats,
Yeah.
which really was interesting, which is really why I liked Led Zeppelin too.
That's awesome. A lot of people I've never read, and I've read a lot about him, and I've seen a lot of interviews, but I've never heard him say or read who his true first influences were at Gene Krupa. However, if you listen to Max Roach's The Drum Also Waltzes, that's where John Bonham got all that bucket of fish stuff. It's the same as Max was playing. And I've never heard him mention as people saying, they've always given the credit to Gene Krupa, but you can hear it. It's exactly the same thing that he got from Max. It has to be.
I think a lot of times people hear things, and I don't think that they really focus on what it is that they hear. They say general statements and
Yeah.
general. I mean, because that's easier to understand.
And
You know,
then we get the herd mentality out of that.
Tony Williams. That's why Tony Williams was the master that he was. For me, he's GD, God drums,
Yeah.
because of the fact that he was such a genius to be able to take what he does and do it in any kind of music that he plays. That's the genius of what it is. And I think that to a certain degree, that's what John Bonham did with,
Hmm.
with the kind of music that he played. And that's why, those guys, for me, I mean, well, Tony Williams is the master for me, and how that translates, there's a translation somewhat into what John Bonham did in Led Zeppelin.
Yeah.
So for me, that's why he became the other guy outside of the uh, um, Magnificent Seven that I listened to. I mean, and coming up, I listened to all these different kinds of musics and how they all fit together with these guys, the
Yeah.
Magnificent Seven, Jabo Starks, and Clyde Stubblefield, and uh, um, John Bonham, and some Latin drummers too. Orestes Vilato
Yeah.
and, and Chapito, Nicky Morero, who played timbales. And
Yeah.
I got into all of those guys because I played Latin music, and I played some rock and roll music and jazz music coming up. I listened to all of that different kind of music. So those are my guys.
I think it's so important for not just drummers, but all musicians to listen to more than the genre you're really into.
Oh, of
Listen
course.
to the music your heroes listened to so you understand where their influences came from. And it's simply, I even tell people, listen to music you don't like because there'll be something in there that you can grab and put in your toolbox. You can't shut anything out just for your own personal sensibilities or emotional reasons because there's little gems sprinkled everywhere.
That's the difference between just being a drummer and a musician.
That's a great way to put it. Absolutely. Yeah. I want to show a clip of you playing and then I have a question about your drumming. Let's do this one. Check this out, everybody. So my question, I've never heard the answer to this. So I'd like you to set me and I'm sure some other people straight. My wife would like anyone to set me straight. That's another story. She's a huge fan of yours. She's a huge jazz fan. Her mom, in fact, lived a couple doors down from Thelonious Monk at one point, if you
Oh,
can imagine the nonsense she heard going on down the hall. But my question is, are you a left-handed drummer playing on a right fixed kit, or are you a right-handed drummer playing open-handed, or is there a difference?
I'm not sure if there is a difference, but
Okay.
I was left-handed, and then when I went to school, they switched me and made
Mm,
me right-handed. So I do things on both sides of the body.
yeah.
Um, it's really easy to play the ride cymbal with the left hand and not cross over when you play the hi-hat. So I don't know if you want to call me um, right-handed that just plays with the left hand ride, because when I play brushes right-handed.
Oh, really?
Yes. So what happens is, like, when you play brushes and you play down like this, that's what I do with the right hand.
Interesting.
So when I play left-handed ride, you know, but you play right-handed ride and you do all the things with
Yeah.
your left hand here.
Yeah.
So I don't know how that transferred to me in my brain, but um, I play brushes right-handed and play ride cymbal with my left hand.
That's interesting. I'm going to take a question in a moment from Russell Coley the third. But before I do, I want to mention it's interesting that you left-handed. And what did they see you were set up backwards? And they said, "Yeah, we're not doing that. This is how it works." The interesting thing to me is that I never understood, and I'm sure there's a reason. I never understood why left-handed drummers do set up quote backwards, because a left-handed person doesn't sit up. So why do I never understood that. If
Well,
but that's just my little brain.
Billy Cobham is not left-handed,
Right. Right. And he plays the same way with his left hand on the ride and on the hi-hat. Yeah.
and Carter Buford plays the same way,
Yeah.
and Simon Phillips
Yeah.
sometimes does that too.
That's
So
true.
I think sometimes what happens is there's a methodology in how you're supposed to do things, and
Hmm.
I am contrary to that.
Yeah.
I don't think
I think that methodology might come to your stronger limb or side or your favored hand, and maybe that's why. And someone at some point said, "We'll just set up the other way."
I
I
don't
don't know.
know. I don't know what um, there's a methodology. What happens is that a lot of times music is taught a certain way,
Yeah.
and this is how people learn to play. See, everybody who has been taught how to play music plays music that particular way.
Yeah.
I wasn't taught how to play music. I kind of created my style of playing from creating music as opposed to being taught how to play music.
Hmm.
Um, when I went to school and got into the quote unquote orchestra, I didn't learn how to read music. I had a methodology on how to play the music, but I didn't know how to read it.
Hmm.
So when I went and got into the orchestra and played timpani, I had F and C or B flat G,
Yeah.
and I made a methodology on how to make this work. The small timpani was the note with the stem going up.
Hmm.
The big timpani was the note with the stem going down. I played through 4 years of high school that way. Either
Wow.
I was extremely lucky or the head of the orchestra said, "Don't worry about it. Let him play whatever he wants to play." I don't know. I don't know. But that's how I got through school and playing.
Yeah. That's great. Timpani is my favorite instrument. I have a pair of timpanis that I'm the second owner of. I got when I was 14 in 1977.
Wow.
My parents were just so. wonderfully supportive. I saw Led Zeppelin that year, and I told my parents, I want two things. I'll do anything for them. I want timpani drums and an 8-string mandolin, which I still have on a shelf up here from that year. And they found these two timpanis from a guy who owned a music store nearby, which wasn't the music store I grew up at, but a different music store. And his name was Mel Zelnick, and he played drums and percussion for people like Artie Shaw and people like that. My parents bought the pair for $700. They're fiberglass pedal-tuned Slingerlands, and I still have them set up with my set. Favorite instrument. Let's take a question here from two, actually. From Russell. Says, Return to Forever and Romantic Warrior. My first hearing of Lenny White. I've been a fan ever since. Great drummer. And his question, what is your concept of time, feel, and groove? And what is your opinion is missing in today's teaching of learning and expressing time, feel, and groove?
Woo.
That's a heavy question. That's deep.
That's a heavy question, man.
Yeah. Was that for Lenny or me or someone else? No, just kidding.
Well, it's a very interesting perspective. My concept of time, feel, and groove, I believe that they're all the same thing. The issue is in teaching someone about time. Time is relevant to who and what kind of music you're playing. Time exists, and time is the same thing within all those different translations of music. I think the one thing that is missing today in playing music is the emphasis and the definite translation of a triplet. Triplets make the music swing. Triplets make the music groove. And I think that perspective of how you play triplets and how you make triplets work within the music is what's missing today. It's not just eighth notes. It's not da 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 da.
Right.
It's the triplet feel that makes things animate. The triplet is the one rudiment that really makes things animate.
That makes so much sense. I never thought of it that way, but I could totally hear that. And just because someone can teach someone else the triplet figure, is there a way to teach feel and groove, even if they know the grouping? Is it because the feel and groove has so much to do with how it's played? You know, it's so present in John Bonham's playing. You know, if we go back to that,
because a triplet is very, very prominent in John Bonham's playing.
Yeah,
it's obvious. See, triplet is the most African of the rudiments that are played also. And how that flows, okay, if you take, for instance, the Purdy Shuffle.
Yeah, I was just thinking of that, and then Fool in the Rain. Yeah, go ahead. This is interesting.
There it is. They both do the same thing.
Yeah.
The interpretation is the same thing.
Yeah.
Rosanna, it comes from that. Those are the same thing. It's the translation of the triplet, those three different ways.
Yeah.
But that's what makes it work, is a triplet.
Interesting, because even Down by the Seaside is a very slowed down version of the shuffle. It's the same thing, just much slower and subtle.
Yeah.
That's a great question, Russell. Thanks.
Yeah, Russell, that's a great question, man. Great question.
Yeah, totally. And speaking of, again, Return to Forever, here is you guys playing live. Check this out, folks. There's so much groove there, it almost freaking hurts.
because it's
Seriously.
Dan, it's a triplet. When you play the triplet, man, everything
Changes, yeah.
it comes together, man. It really
Yeah.
does. You know.
That's so enlightening. Thanks for that. I've never really put that together, but as soon as you said it, it made perfect sense. Even in that first solo that I showed of you playing, you're playing a spaced out triplet over everything else that's going on when that first started. Bah, 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 bah. It's right there. I'm going to hear music totally differently now. Which is great. Talk about the Lenny White Band.
Well, I mean, after I did Return to Forever, I had to put something together because I had some of my own music. Um, and I had actually some people, friends of mine, younger friends of mine from my neighborhood, Jamaica, Queens, that I put in my band. Marcus Miller being one of them,
Mm-hmm.
you know. Um, See, in my neighborhood growing up, I mean, I was a little bit older than some of these guys, but Marcus Miller, Omar Hakim, um, uh, Donald Blackman, and Bernard Wright. These are Q-Tip. These are some of the guys that came out of my neighborhoods. So we played all different kinds of musics. Unlike Minneapolis, Prince and Jimmy and Terry and all those guys, they came out and they played some real great music, but it was a certain kind of vibe.
Yeah.
But the guys that came from Jamaica, Queens, we played all kinds of musics. We played all different kinds of music. So they were jazz players, they were rock players, they were funk players, they were hip hop guys, and they all came from the same neighborhood, but they had different interpretations of the music that was being played at that time. And so I had a lot of choices of great young musicians to um, choose from to make the translation of the music that I was listening to and wanted to play at the time. So I had some really good guys, and we made some really good music. The 29 man, Lenny White and 29, we made a few really good records that
Yeah.
were big hits. So uh, it was fun.
Yeah.
It was fun. Like Donald Blackman had written a piece of music that he came to me after I had done my record, and he said, "Hey man, we should record this tune. It's going to be a big hit." And when he brought it to me, I listened to it. I said, "Man, if I record this tune, man, I'm going to have to play this for the rest of my life, man, because it's going to be a big hit." And it was a big hit. It was
Yeah.
called Peanut Butter, and
Mhm.
from that, I did a tour with Rick James and Prince, and that was Prince's first major tour across the
Oh,
United States.
really?
Oh yeah, oh yeah.
Interesting.
It was a pretty big hit, you know, and I got to meet both Rick and Prince, and they were really good guys, really good guys.
Yeah.
And it was kind of cool because there was this fusion of different kinds of musics that had morphed into this thing that later became hip hop.
Yeah. Yeah. Um, Prince really turned out to show, what a genius, not only what a genius he is, but how genius people could be with creating music and basically being able to pick up and play just about any instrument he wanted, write for almost any instrument. My wife's oldest son, Kevon, plays Morris Day in the Prince tribute in Las Vegas called Purple Rain. And we go see that show whenever we go out there. We're actually going out there this weekend for one of the kids' birthdays and a project I have with Drum Talk TV. And if we can squeeze that in, we will. But it's always fun to see, just the amount of music that man put out that isn't all the same, and all were just such big, huge hits over the span of his musical life. Just
Oh
amazing.
yeah, oh yeah, without a doubt. I mean, we became friends
Hmm.
and shared music. I mean, like I was in a funny story. I was in Paris and I played and I walked out into the club and I saw Prince was there and like all the other guys in the band were like, "Oh my God, Prince is here!" Oh, and they became like enamored with that. But he was really cool. He was a cool guy. I mean, like as I said, we shared music and shared good times. I mean,
Yeah.
he went on in his first tour. He didn't have a bus.
Mm.
And I saw him. I said, "Man, come on the bus." So I brought his band on my bus, and that's how we got around on doing certain things. Not overnight tours, but
Yeah.
going from this gig to this gig.
Yeah.
So
That's awesome.
he was really cool guy, really cool guy.
That's cool.
Yeah.
Lenny, I know you have somewhere you have to go. There's so much more to talk about. I'd love to have you on again. We'll do that. Hang on for a moment after
Sure.
we say goodbye to the audience. And folks, thank you so much for joining Lenny White and myself, Dan Shinder, here on Drum Talk TV. You can find us on pretty much any platform that you follow: YouTube, Facebook, Vimeo, Instagram, and X, or whatever that guy's calling it this week. And we've got so much more planned and some special stuff coming. Our documentary is going to debut literally any day in a moment, and a lot of stuff happening with our membership site as well. So stay tuned, and we'll see you soon with more fun music discussions with other great artists. Thanks, everybody. Thanks, Lenny. And folks, we'll see you soon.